What's happening in court today? According to the transcripts and video feeds available, the presiding judge has given Kanu a last chance to enter his defense or face judgment. The courtroom atmosphere is thick with expectation. For example, one source says judgment will be delivered if you fail to enter defense. Court tells Kanu. Think about that for a moment. After years of proceedings, the court is signaling either you come in to defend now or we call it a day and decide your fate. If you're watching, imagine how heavy that feels. The man whose case has dragged on, possibly entering a critical phase. Why is this important? Because Kanu's case isn't just about him. It taps into questions of national stability, rights of the southeastern region, secessionist sentiment, the role of justice and fairness in Nigeria. When IPOB calls him a prisoner of conscience, unlawfully detained, they are making a serious claim about how the state treats dissent and political activism. Let's break this down step by step. First, the history. Kanu has been away from Nigeria, has been arrested and extradited, which itself was controversial, and his trial has been stalled, deferred, and delayed many times. E.g., his trial was pushed to October after he failed to appear in court in a past hearing. Second, the current pivot. The court is signaling that after all these delays, they won't keep postponing. The judge's patience appears to be running out. Third, the strategic stand of Kanu and IPOB. They say the charges are politically motivated, the detention is unlawful, and they are ready to challenge the process. That's not an ordinary defense strategy. It's high stakes. Fourth, the wider implications. If judgment is delivered soon, it sends a message, not just for Kanu, but for all activists, for the region, for how the federal government handles major security and political dissent cases. Now, I want you to think with me about some of the questions this raises. If Kanu is forced to proceed now, will he or his lawyers have enough time to mount a proper defense? What if they say they are not ready? If the court delivers judgment without a full defense, how will that impact his legitimacy? His supporters say it'll be unjust. What does this say about the judicial system in Nigeria? If years of delay end this way, is that justice? How will the public react, and especially the southeast region? Will this escalate tensions further? We should also consider another element, the prosecuting side. IPOB claims that the prosecution has no investigation report supporting the charges. They argue the case is collapsing. So, you see, the court is dealing with a case where the defense says the evidence is weak. The prosecution says, we have our case. And the judge says, let's wrap this up. From your perspective, as someone watching this unfold, this is the moment where years of waiting meet a possible climax. Will we see Kanu present his defense? Will the case be decided soon? The next few weeks could change the political and judicial landscape in Nigeria. So, if you're still with me, here's what you should keep an eye on. The date of the next hearing. Will the defense actually enter? Any new filings by Kanu's legal team? Are they going to file fresh motions or challenge jurisdiction? What the judge says in open court, whether he expresses frustration, gives new deadlines, or sets a firm date for judgment. The reaction from IPOB supporters and from federal authorities. Will there be public statements, protests, or shifts in tone? And as always, if you haven't yet, like this video and subscribe, because we'll keep tracking this story together, and I'll bring you updates as soon as they drop. So, during the session today, the major highlight was that Justice Binta Nyako, who has been presiding over the case at the Federal High Court in Abuja, made it very clear that this is the last opportunity for Nnamdi Kanu and his legal team to open their defense. She emphasized that the court cannot keep adjourning endlessly. She said something along the lines of, if by the next sitting the defense is not ready, the court will be left with no choice but to close the case. Now, for those who may not understand how serious that is, let me explain in simple terms. When a judge says that, it means the court is tired of delays. And if the defense doesn't take action, the court can go ahead to make a judgment without hearing the defendant's side fully. And that's a big deal, because this is a case that has dragged on since 2015. That's nearly 10 years now. So, in court today, it was more of a tense atmosphere. Reports from people inside said the mood was serious but controlled. Kanu's lawyers kept insisting that certain procedures haven't been followed by the federal government, especially regarding his alleged unlawful arrest and detention. They claim he was abducted and brought back to Nigeria illegally. They also mentioned that the court cannot proceed as if nothing happened. But the judge made it clear, this matter cannot go on forever. And this is why many Nigerians are paying attention today, because this could be the turning point of the entire case. Let's talk about how we got to this point. Nnamdi Kanu was arrested abroad and brought back to Nigeria in 2021. Since then, he has been facing charges of terrorism, incitement, and membership of a proscribed group, the Indigenous People of Biafra, IPOB. Now, IPOB as an organization insists they are not terrorists but freedom fighters. They say their mission is to peacefully advocate for a separate Biafran state through democratic means. However, the Nigerian government says IPOB's activities, including protests and sit-at-home orders, have caused violence, deaths, and insecurity in parts of the southeast. That's why they labeled the group as a terrorist organization. Now, whether you agree with one side or not, what makes this situation tricky is that both sides are claiming to stand for justice. The government says it's protecting the country's unity. IPOB says it's fighting against oppression and injustice. And Kanu, being the face of that movement, is caught right in the middle of it. In court today, according to transcripts, Kanu's lead counsel raised fresh objections about his health and his detention conditions. They argued that the DSS has not allowed him proper medical access and that he cannot prepare his defense effectively while in custody. The prosecution, on the other hand, said that the DSS has been following all the court's instructions and that Kanu's health is being taken care of. Now, this kind of back and forth is not new in this case. We've seen it before, and it's one of the reasons the matter keeps dragging. But with the judge's warning today, it's clear that the patience of the court is wearing thin. If you're watching this right now, ask yourself, what happens if the defense still doesn't open by the next hearing date? That means the case may be closed, and the judge could deliver judgment based on what the prosecution has presented so far. That is why this period is so critical for both sides. Because whatever happens next could shape not only the future of Nnamdi Kanu, but also the direction of IPOB's struggle and the political temperature in the southeast. Now, let's be honest, a lot of people are divided on this issue. Some say Kanu should be freed immediately, that he has suffered enough, and that his continued detention is only fueling more anger. Others say the law must take its full course, that no one is above the law, and that the system must be respected. But one thing everyone agrees on is that Nigeria needs peace. The country has been dealing with insecurity, economic challenges, and division, and this case touches all of that. Every time this trial comes up, social media goes crazy and emotions rise again. That's why this matter is more than just a courtroom issue. It's also a national conversation. Now, I want you to think about something else. If this case is finally concluded soon, how will that affect the southeast region? Some people believe it might calm things down if there's a fair judgment, but others worry that if the verdict doesn't favor Kanu, it could trigger fresh agitation or unrest. That's why many Nigerians, including elders, political leaders, and rights activists, are calling for a diplomatic or political solution instead of a purely legal one. So, here's the summary of today's session. The judge made it clear this is the last chance for Kanu's defense team. The legal team raised concerns about his detention and health. The prosecution insisted that due process is being followed. The next hearing date will determine whether the defense presents their case or the court moves to judgment. Everything now rests on what happens in that next sitting. And as we continue to follow this story, I'll keep bringing you the full breakdowns in plain, easy English, so you know exactly what's happening. Please, if you're still watching right now, take 1 second, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell, so that when I post the next update, you'll be the first to know. You see, this case is not happening in isolation. The Nnamdi Kanu trial sits right in the middle of a very sensitive time in Nigeria, when many people are frustrated about governance, hardship, and insecurity. So, whenever this case comes up, it brings back those emotions, not only among IPOB members, but among many Nigerians who feel the system is unfair or too slow to deliver justice. Today, even though the court sitting was inside Abuja, the impact was felt across the southeast. In places like Enugu, Aba, Onitsha, and Owerri, people were glued to updates, listening to radio, scrolling through social media, waiting to hear what would happen. For some, this case represents hope. For others, it's a symbol of how divided Nigeria still is. Reports show that IPOB members and supporters have remained firm, insisting that Kanu's detention is illegal and that the government must release him unconditionally. They continue to describe him as a prisoner of conscience, someone being punished for expressing his political opinion. The group's spokesperson has also said repeatedly that the court must act in the interest of justice and fairness, not politics. But the federal government, through the Attorney General's office, has maintained that Kanu's case is strictly legal, that it's not about politics or ethnicity, but about upholding the law. They argued that the charges against him involve national security, and no government can ignore that. So, what we have here is a battle between two sides who both believe they are standing for what's right. Now, here's where the story becomes more layered. Behind the scenes, there are also political and diplomatic undercurrents. Remember, Kanu's arrest and extradition in 2021 sparked controversy internationally, with claims that the process violated international law. Since then, several international human rights groups have called for his release, saying the trial has been unfair. So, if you think about it carefully, this is not just a Nigerian court case. It's a matter that has drawn global attention. The world is watching how Nigeria handles this situation because it touches on human rights, rule of law, and freedom of expression. Let's talk a bit about the possible outcomes and what each could mean. If Kanu eventually opens his defense and the case proceeds normally, it gives the court a chance to weigh both sides and make a balanced decision. That could restore confidence in the justice system, especially if the judgment is fair and transparent. But if, for some reason, the defense does not open and the court goes ahead to close the case and deliver judgment without hearing from him, there could be backlash. His supporters may feel cheated, and it could create new tension across the region. That's why observers are saying this next step must be handled very carefully. Another possibility that people are talking about, especially among elders and political leaders, is the idea of a political settlement. Some Southeast governors and traditional rulers have suggested that the federal government should explore dialogue rather than continue this endless court battle. They believe that finding a political or reconciliatory solution could bring peace and stability to the region faster than legal proceedings alone. But so far, the government hasn't publicly shown interest in that path. They are focused on seeing the case through to its legal conclusion. And honestly, that's part of why Nigerians are divided. One group says, let him face trial like anyone else, while another says, this case needs wisdom, not just law. Now, let's talk about how this affects ordinary Nigerians, especially people living in the Southeast. The repeated tension, the sit-at-home orders, and the fear of violence every time Kanu's case comes up have affected daily life and business. Markets are closed, transport is disrupted, and economic activity slows down. People are tired of living in fear and uncertainty. Many are just praying for this case to end, one way or another, so life can return to normal. That's why many Nigerians, even outside the Southeast, are following this story closely. Because it's not just about one man. It's about whether the country can learn to handle issues of identity, justice, and political differences in a peaceful way. Now, before we wrap this part, let's quickly recap what's next. The next hearing date is expected to be crucial. If Kanu's team presents their defense, the case will move forward. If they don't, the judge may close it and prepare to deliver judgment. Either way, something big is about to happen, and we'll all be watching. As we continue to track this story, remember that we'll always bring it to you in plain, clear language. No confusion, no bias, just the facts and the gist as they happen.